Welcome, fellow traveler, to phase 2 of the journey. The path to enlightenment begins from within and spreads outwards into the universe. As the universe is the manifestation of the essence of consciousness, no outward motion can occur without inward transformation. As such, it is up to you, the traveler, to unlock what awaits beyond the veil.
The moment you've been waiting for is coming up in just a few moments. John Titor will be joining us. We're having a little difficulty time bringing him on, so we're going to work that out here in the background. Shuri's on the phone with him right now, and we are going to get to the topics of the broadcast. But let me say this. John Titor, for those of you that don't know, is the name used on several bulletin boards during 2000 and 2001 by a poster claiming to be a military time traveler from the year 2036. In these posts, Titor made numerous predictions about future events, some vague, some quite specific, starting with events in 2004. He described a drastically changing future, which the United States had broken up into 5 smaller regions. The environment and infrastructure had been devastated by a nuclear attack, and other world powers had been destroyed. Before the time frame of his predicted events came and went, Titor's story, invoked curiosity and received attention from around the world. In the decade following his appearances on the internet, fiction and music were written about the character, and his origins were investigated by journalists and many others. The case also provoked widespread skepticism. Flaws were observed in Titor's stories, and none of the specific events he predicted had actually occurred. But this led to the general conclusion that the story was probably an elaborate hoax. In 2009, investigations suggested that Titor was likely the creation of Larry Haber, a Florida entertainment lawyer, along with his brother John, a computer scientist. Eventually, Joseph Matheny claimed to be part of the group who invented and produced the story. Now, I don't know how I feel about the original John Titor story, because there were some elements of it that rang true. There were other elements that did not. I have a dear friend, Donnie Gilson, who claims that his brother, and not a physical brother, but his spiritual brother, was actually behind creating John Titor initially as well. What to make of all these stories, I really don't know. But the stories have indeed been fascinating. Fascinating enough for it to leave a legend and a legacy across the internet, where people to this very day are still trying to understand exactly who this John Titor was that sent a fax to Art Bell in 1997 and then appeared on bulletin board systems throughout 2000 and 2001, making predictions and whatnot. There's actually one of our longtime listeners and friends from the chat room who calls himself John Titor Was Here in honor of John Titor. There's some fans, some skeptics out there as well. However, this evening we're speaking with Jason Quitt, and we're also speaking with John Titor II. John Titor II entered duty with the Air Force as an airman in the U.S. Air Force at Dulce, New Mexico. He was specifically trained because of his abilities to become an officer and a pilot. He received intensive training on the latest airframes and power plants available, including the legendary TR-3B. It states TR-3B here, but I seem to remember it being called the TR-3B Astra, and he calls it a spacecraft in this bio. Many of our longtime listeners know that Shuri and I actually saw one of these over Dallas as we were fishing in Lake Dallas one early morning, and we reported on it the next day. It was flying about 35, 40 miles an hour and then just took off into hyperspace, or maybe it just disappeared. we really don't know. But John Titor, too, who is joining us, has a very interesting take as to what these TR-3B Astros are all about, or TR-3B spacecraft. He commanded the 177th Time Travel Division. Later, he was given the command of combat group that eliminated a threat to the planet by extraterrestrials. It's funny that clip from The Day the Earth Stood Still played prior to the segment beginning. As I've mentioned before, the little short clips we play during the breaks are completely random, but they seem to always play in perfect synchronicity with what we're talking about on the show.
They do.
Titor retired from the Air Force and entered private life to make the public aware of environmental issues the world faces and force the issue of disclosure with the government. He's the author of numerous articles on politics, threats to the United States, and the environment. He's also the co-author of Disclosed, Chronicles of John Titor II. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, John, how are you doing, sir?
I'm just fine, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I've got to say, I heard you with one of my friends, George, recently, and remarkable interview. So I just want to say, kudos on that, and well done. It really opened up a whole new realm of understanding for me personally. When Cherie brought all this material to my attention, I thought, well, this is going to be an interesting show. But when I really started to delve deep into it, I realized just how interesting this is going to be. So I gave kind of an introduction, but tell us in your own words who you are and why you are John Titor, and maybe we can also get into who the John Titor of 2000 was as well.
I guess that after I retired from the Air Force, I basically went to the year 2000, and I was trying to keep that under wraps because I had just resigned and was discharged in the year 2036, and it was just almost 2037, and I wanted to go to the year 2000 because someone that I loved, when I last saw them, they were in the year 2000. And so I didn't use my connections with the military to go back in time. I actually used a friend who's an extraterrestrial, and he had a spacecraft that he said he would basically give me a lift in.
Now, John, let me jump in for just a moment. I don't mean to interrupt. Do you have a fan or air conditioner on or anything like that in the background?
I actually do.
Okay, yeah. Can we get you to turn that off? Fantastic.
Okay.
We want to make sure that this information gets out to the audience loud and clear. So bear with us, ladies and gentlemen, and we will get that buzzing taken care of for you. But I'm really on fire tonight, as everybody can tell, because time travel, teleportation, the Mandela Effect, the future of mankind is really what people are really interested in right now, including myself, because we're forging the future right now. Everything we do creates the future. And so that's why it's really important for us to understand what the present really is all about. John, please take us away.
So I was brought back to the year 2000, and they took me to this little airport called Dulce Airport. It was like 2 a.m. in the morning, and we landed there with two spacecraft, and they pushed one spacecraft into a hangar and closed the door and locked it and gave me the key and said, "That one's yours." And so then my friend Marcia, who I actually dedicated the book to, Marcia rolled up in a late model Honda, and I said goodbye to my friend Rock, who was an extraterrestrial. And
well, John, hold right there. I think we're jumping a little bit too far into the story, so let's pick it up on the other side. We've got John Titor and Jason Quitt right here on Beyond the Veil. All right, let's get back into it with John Titor and Jason Quitt. Now, John, we jumped a little bit ahead, so I'm still a little unclear as to the relation with the John Titor from 2000 and yourself. Are you the same person, or can you break that down for the audience so we can really get a good understanding?
Well, I was just getting to that. When I retired and I started living in the year 2000 with my wife, Marcia, I was trying to keep a low profile, and basically I started hearing my name in the media, and I had heard that this one person, Art Bell, had a very good relationship with John Titor, and I never talked to him. I didn't know who Art Bell was. Later I would find out. But I was just hearing my name bantered around. So what I think happened was that some people deliberately were spreading misinformation. And I was afraid that I wouldn't even be allowed off Area 51 because of what I knew. There aren't a lot of TR-3B pilots, and I was cross-trained on navigational systems, and I know the airframe and the power plant very well. And most of these things are all top secret.
So you were actually a TR-3B pilot?
Yes.
Oh, I see.
Wow.
Okay. So what year were you... Oh, yeah, let's start with that. What year were you born?
I don't know if you can say that I was even born. I've had a little difficulty with it. Sometime in 1979, I was awakened, and I had memory implants. And at Dulce, what they were doing is they were cloning soldiers, and they still may be doing that very same thing. They've been cloning for a long time. They can do replacement body parts, of course, for high-level people in the government, things like that. And even recently, because of what Edward Snowden's released, that information, now the head of the military in Iran says that Obama's a clone. So it's hard to say.
Well, there is a lot of talk of cloning. We've talked about it here on the broadcast. Kanye West just released a music video called Famous. And I don't know if you've seen this, but it starts out with this song, but the video has nothing to do with the song, but rather it has Donald Trump, Bill Cosby, himself, Rihanna, several very famous people all lying in a bed together, and they're completely naked. They're covering up their belly buttons too, which is kind of an old, I forget the term that I'm looking for, but it's kind of a way to, it's an old theory of how clones are and that they don't have belly buttons. So they're all lying in a bed, and it's this very like a cell phone looking video that is taking this picture of all of these people. The music stops, and then you just hear them snoring for about 3 or 4 minutes. People are saying that it's a clone operation Disclosure, but it's even coming out in mainstream music. I mean, it's very, very strange, but the idea of cloning is definitely there.
They I guess 20, 30 years ago, they were cloning animals and were very successful, and they went on to human beings. The problem that the military has, and they still have it, is that 70% of high school graduates in the United States are not fit for military service.
Oh, I would believe that.
So they started using clones.
Yes, and the other thing was they needed people that if you gave them instructions, that would be the priority. I would always follow my orders and my instructions to the letter. I wouldn't question the orders. That just wasn't part of my thinking ever.
Okay, so you were born, or rather cloned, sometime in the 70s, and then in the year 2000, so this was 40 years later, 30 years later, John Titor comes out, uses your name, starts posting all over the place, And it happens to be that you're also a pilot for these TR-3B Astras, which are time travel machines, basically. So this was essentially a disinformation campaign to perhaps preemptively discredit you.
And poison the well.
And poison the well, because in 2015, 2016, you were going to come out. And if they knew about time travel, then they obviously were able to predict this. And so they were able to preemptively 15 years ago start discrediting everything that you're trying to say now. Is that pretty accurate?
I think that it's the nail on the head. Exactly.
Well, the logical question is, what are you going to disclose that is threatening the establishment so much? Maybe we can start with the TR-3Bs.
TR-3Bs have been around for quite a while, and they were originally designed to be modularly upgraded, and so that airframe, they wanted to use it for a long time. The power plant is good for quite a while. There's always a certain amount of maintenance that is required on these spacecraft, but they are very, I would say, reliable airframes, and they're intergalactic. These spacecraft can exceed the speed of light, but the problem is, you can get going really fast, but you have to be able to navigate at speed around things that if you don't navigate around them, you'll just run into them and disintegrate.
When I saw the TR-3B Astra, I'm guessing that's just a subclass of the TR-3B, but I saw a little round, well, not little, it was huge, but there was a round circle right in the middle of the underside of it that had a light emanating from it, but it wasn't a bright light. It was just like a reddish. It was like glow.
Like half an orb sticking out from underneath it. That was like an orange or red. It looked like some kind of power mechanism.
That's where the power plant is. And what happens is it generates its own gravity field, so you don't feel any G's in this spacecraft. You could walk around as you're getting up to the speed of light. Sure, you can make radical right turns and not get thrown against the bulkhead because you have your own gravity.
Fascinating. As I mentioned, when I saw these things in the sky, well, it was just one. It was traveling probably 30, 40 miles an hour and then flew off into hyperspace. So I'm wondering if that's the typical flight pattern. Perhaps when it disappeared, it didn't actually fly into light speed, but rather it flew into another dimension because we followed it as much as we could until it disappeared behind the trees, never to reappear again.
When time is but a loop, with a loose stitch in the universal cloth, seize upon the chance traveler and step beyond the veil.
I just want to take a moment to thank Paul Hughes over at WITY in Chattanooga for picking up the program. And if you want to hear Beyond the Veil on your local station, give them a call, let them know. Call them several times on our behalf, as a matter of fact. And let's get this out there as far and wide as possible. When we have great guests like Jason Quitt and John Titor, then it really deserves to get out there as much as possible. So back to the story of John Titor 2, not to be confused with John Titor from 2000. We are on the topic of the TR-3B Astras, and essentially they're time travel machines that John piloted himself. Jason, feel free to jump in anytime. But John, I want to ask you about how the military actually acquired such technology.
It's black technology, And we have agreements with extraterrestrials and diplomatic relations with the Anunnaki. We have an agreement with the reptilians, an agreement with the tall whites, and the grays. The tall whites actually have a spaceport at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada. It used to be called Indian Springs Gunnery Range, and a huge underground spaceport was created for the tall whites. At Area 51, the S4 area is designated for the grays, and they use it as a spaceport. They land there, do maintenance, and take off again. They also work with the U.S. Air Force on certain reconnaissance missions. They do a basic transfer of technology to us. They have helped us build what you call the TR-3B.
Wow.
Amazing. So I've heard from people like Paul Hellyer and many others that we're in league with the tall whites, with the grays. I always go back to Bill Cooper's work, Behold a Pale Horse, where he talks about a landing between humanoids and the grays as well, around the same period of time, a month apart from each other, maybe a couple of months, but around the same time period. And we actually made a deal with the grays to give them our software in exchange for their hardware. And by our software, we mean DNA and things like that. And they gave us technology. What do you think of that exchange, and could this technology have come from that exchange?
I'm sure that exchange was made. Those kinds of things happen at Dulce, New Mexico.
I see. There's a lot of controversy about what's going on over at the Dulce base. Phil Schneider reported on this many, many years ago. He was strangely murdered after he came out. What's really going on in Dulce?
I think it's biomedical labs, and they are cloning there. And what I was told was that a group of military that didn't understand what was going on there thought that aliens were actually experimenting on humans, and what they were doing was making humans or clones. And there was some kind of confrontation, and people were killed, and extraterrestrials were killed. It was very regrettable. The hard thing to understand is, even during my training, part of my training at Dulce was I was taken to a classroom with 3 other people on my team, and they had an extraterrestrial come in, and he introduced himself, and he was testing us to see if we could use telepathy to talk to him. And
can you describe these extraterrestrials? Were they short grays, tall grays? Did they have facial features? Were they wearing clothes?
They do wear a uniform, and it's not like the Air Force's uniform. I think it's even of lighter ripstop material. It's like somewhat like a flight suit, but it's very light material. They have a problem maintaining body heat, and they don't like to necessarily wear heavy clothing. But I have seen them in situations when it's very cold outside. They'll add layers. I've seen that. But in the book, we actually have some good pictures of the grays, and they're not menacing. They're about 4'6". However, some can be as tall as 7 feet or better. They are, for the most part, very friendly and not aggressive.
That's not what I've heard. People are always reporting that the grays are not necessarily hostile, but more scientific minded. It would be the same as if we went into a colony of ants, for instance, and started experimenting on ants or mice or something. We don't necessarily want to harm them, but we do things that hurt and that harm the test subjects in the name of science. And I've always seen the grays as having that same type of non-emotional attachment to the people that they encounter. Is that not accurate?
No. I was able to make friends with the Gray over a number of years. And I'd met him at Dulce, and then I actually worked with him later at Area 51. And he's actually what you would call an envoy to the United States Air Force, and he coordinates missions. But I have seen them joke and try to insert levity into conversations. And I've seen a little of that. But it takes a long time to get them to warm up to you, because initially we're overpowering to them, and they're afraid and they're timid. They wouldn't do well in any kind of face-to-face physical confrontation with a human being. You can tear them apart very easily. Their bones and muscular makeup very fragile, but they do have some very advanced weapons at their disposal, not the least of which would be plasma weapons and particle beam weapons. They have those.
Wow.
The one thing that shakes me up a little bit about the Greys is the technology that they use to disassociate people from their consciousness. It's some type of paralysis machine that they use when they encounter somebody. And I take this from the many, many, many different stories and accounts that I've heard firsthand, and I've also read about secondhand on the internet. But I've interviewed people who've had encounters with the Greys, and they all seem to have the general theme of not being able to control their own body and their own consciousness during these interactions. Are you familiar with this technology?
I've heard about it. You would have to understand that first time you see an extraterrestrial, and if you're not prepared at all for it, it could be a frightening experience by just meeting them. But
that is very true. I've often pondered if perhaps the reason they put people in that state is because for their own protection. I mean, you have a man that can be 6 foot tall and 250 pounds, and you have these little guys that are 3 feet, seemingly fragile. Maybe you can chime in on this on the other side, but from what I gather, their body is seemingly fragile while their consciousness has been elevated to a point of telepathy. And so it would be very easy for such a large man to harm these extraterrestrials. And if we've seen anything, we've seen in the United States especially, people are shooting at unidentified flying objects in the sky. We've heard many reports on that. So I would imagine that humans are seen as hostile creatures by nature. Mm-hmm. Some of us are more elevated than others, but maybe we can get to the point to where we're all living in harmony together. Don't go anywhere. We've got John Titor and Jason Quitt right here on Beyond the Veil. This is definitely the place where science fiction meets science fact. Going all the way back to the 40s and talking about little green men and flying saucers, all the way to the present, where we're talking about the Greys and firsthand testimony from John Titor, what's going on at the Dulce underground base, the involvement we have with these extraterrestrials, and the TR-3B Astras, which are being used for time travel and teleportation. Of course, time travel is nothing that is foreign to this broadcast, Andy Bishago being one of our dear friends and regular guests on the show, as well as William Whitecrow, who disclosed being part of Project Mars and Project Pegasus himself, too, right here on the show. Now we have John Titor on with us, and we're really getting to the bottom of this. So, John, we were talking about the involvement with these extraterrestrials, these Greys, the tall ones, the small ones. Any idea where these guys are actually from? Are they from planet Earth themselves? Could they be maybe some other race that existed here before humans were here? Or do they come from a distant galaxy?
They come from Zeta Reticuli, and they pretty much tell us where it is, but it's several light years away. And I believe that they came to Earth at one point with the Anunnaki, and they had interaction with the Anunnaki on this planet. The Anunnaki attempted to colonize the entire planet, and most notably, Sumer was that a result of that. They civilized what is Mesopotamia. They gave mankind cuneiform, a written language. They taught math and music and agriculture. These were very advanced humanoids, and they were not native to Earth at all. The Anunnaki came from what is reported to be their home planet of Nibiru. But they'd also colonized very successfully Mars.
That's right. The Ajiji were stationed there as part of their way station operation, where the gold was taken from planet Earth to Mars, then off to Nibiru. Now, the question is, were the Greys here before the Anunnaki came, and did the Greys lay some kind of claim to planet Earth and saw the Anunnaki as invaders, perhaps?
No, I think what happened was that the Greys were brought here as a workforce for the Anunnaki. Let me explain this relationship about the Anunnaki. They are a warrior race, and they roam the galaxy looking for worlds to plunder, looking for gold, of course, and other precious metals and precious gems, and they're not above subjugating native peoples. And I think that happened to the Greys, and so the Greys were subjugated by the Anunnaki. And we see many stone depictions that are in Neolithic sites all over the world of the Greys, and we see depictions of the reptilians. And I think that the reptilians were also brought here under those same circumstances by the Anunnaki. But the Anunnaki, I think, ran afoul of an entity, and there was a name attached to it. And it is documented that this entity basically made war on them very successfully. I believe that he waged war against Mars and decimated Mars. And I don't know what the casualties were and how big the devastation was, but I have the name for you, and the name is Yahweh.
Yahweh. Yes, we've talked about that entity in great detail here on the broadcast. Tell us a little bit more about who Yahweh actually is.
Well, I can tell you that from my personal experience, I know that Yahweh is a supreme being. Let me explain this to you. This being can literally be anything that it wants. Does it make use of technology? Absolutely. But I would say that it is not far from being a humanoid like us, but it is very evolved. We only use, like I was engineered to use all of my brain, and I do. My intellect has been measured to be very high. But most humans, when they're born, they go through life only using about 10% of their brain. And we still, I don't think we've even begun to understand the power that a fully functioning brain has. I always test the limits of it myself. with telepathy. I'm an empath. Sometimes doing routine things, I will see people and try to implant a thought in them, and then I'll watch them, and they'll actually do what I wanted them to do by me planting the thought. And it's just a game I play, and sometimes I get caught.
Well, that sounds like the Greys for sure.
And so it can be a little embarrassing, you know. But Marcia, who is my wife, is also a clone, and she was part of my team at Dulce. And we found we always had a fondness for each other, and we always tried to keep it out of sight. And so when she resigned and I resigned, that was our game plan, that we'd get together. And we've been together ever since. But sometimes she'll test me and see if she can implant thoughts in me, you know, and say, oh, so I'll do it. I just resign myself to doing what she wants.
Oh, that's quite a skill that would come in handy around here.
Well, can we do a little experiment? Can you perhaps insert a thought into the minds of the listeners, and then maybe we can reveal what that thought is later on in the broadcast and see if the listeners actually picked up on it?
Ooh.
You know, I think that I'm good to about 10 or 20 feet if I'm looking at the subject. I can...
I
that
see.
makes sense.
Okay.
Well, that also would make you able to speak with the Greys when other humans would not be able to speak with the Greys. Is that because they're telepathic and you were conditioned, your genetics was conditioned to be able to be telepathic as well?
Yes, and that was part of it. And there are sometimes in a military confrontation, when you're face to face with an adversary and you know what they're thinking, it's a distinct advantage. It's not so much that you're looking at body language as they're about to pull the trigger on you, so to speak, but you have an edge. And an edge is sometimes all you need.
Wow. I want to get more into this Yahweh character right on the other side. Now, I'm looking at a screenshot from your book, and you have here a cartouche that's depicting Anunnaki with gray heads on a spear, which I guess signifies the war and the dispute between the Anunnaki and the Greys. I definitely want to get more into that right on the other side. And I mean, we can go on for hours here. The Phoenix Lights, mysterious deaths, domes on the moon. I also want to hear from Jason Quitt on the other side, because he's been sitting quietly in the background for, my God, the full hour now. We're at the end of we're at the end of the second hour of the broadcast. We may do an extended broadcast for you guys tonight, because this is just getting really, really good.
Yeah, I think
and we
might.
haven't even scratched the surface. So stay tuned. Much more coming up right here, Beyond the Veil.
To initiate phase 3 momentarily. Brace yourself, traveler. We are about to venture into the realms of the unknown. www.beyondtheveilradio.com.
No hate, no hype, no fear.
You're listening to Truth Frequency Radio.
We are TFR.
T-minus 60 seconds and counting.
Welcome, fellow traveler, to phase 3 of this journey. Here you will experience an even deeper level of understanding as we traverse through the boundaries of hyperspace consciousness. Here, you will find that reality is altered with a single thought and a single intention. Set your intention now and prepare to travel deeper. Deeper, deeper, deeper. Beyond the veil.
As above, so below. War with the Anunnaki and the Greys. TR-3B Astras overhead. The Dulce underground base working on clones underground. It's just all around us. We're so busy looking at what's in front of us that we don't stop to take a few moments to observe what is all around us and happening right under our nose. Thankfully, we have people like John Quitt and John Titor who are disclosing everything that is taking place just outside the realms of perception and just beyond the veil. Jason, you haven't said anything for a full hour, so I want to apologize to you for not coming to you sooner. But, you know, you start talking to somebody like John Titor, and the conversation just gets so fascinating, and you get engulfed in everything that you stay on topic. So my apologies. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I was enjoying the conversation too, as a listener. But just to get back to a couple things from the last hour, is I actually saw a TR-3B a couple weeks ago, and it did exactly what you said you saw as well. It was moving quite slowly at a low level around the city, and then I just kind of lost sight of it, but it was clearly a triangle with red lights, and this one had a white light in the center. So that's interesting that you saw one too. And then I want to quickly just jump on the point about, people kind of freaking out when they see aliens. And that's probably why they freeze us when they do abductions or contact, because I've come in contact with a handful of different races, and you're never prepared for it. I mean, they usually come at nighttime, and you're fast asleep, and you feel something in the room, and you open your eyes, and suddenly you have this alien face a couple inches from yours looking at you. And the first reaction is you just freak out. And I think I've hit a couple with my pillow because I'm just not prepared for that contact. Even with all my experience, I'm not used to that, getting woken up like that. So maybe that's why they freeze a lot of people or use this technology on them.
That's pretty interesting, because I had a weird dream one night, and I call everything dreams because I can't verify for sure that they were real experiences, but there was actually an altercation with 3 gray entities. And you're right. No matter how much you prepare yourself, whether it's a dream or reality, when you see one of these creatures, they're so otherworldly that your natural reaction is to just scream out or yell or react in a manner, aggressive manner. So I think you're spot on. John, any thoughts?
Well, I developed a friendship with the envoy to the U.S. Air Force, and his name is Rock. I can't pronounce his given name, but we gave him this name Rock. And what he does is that they have the ability to beam up and beam down. And one of the people who would attest to that technology, of course, is Travis Walton. But I live in a compound that's double fenced with chain link fence and concertina wire, and I have guards 24/7. And then
now, John, let me cut you off real quick. Do you have any speakers or anything like that on?
I don't think so.
No? Okay, we're getting a weird echo. Maybe you could mute, Jason. Maybe it's coming from you. But go ahead, John, please.
So what happens is I have this fenced off yard at the back of our house. It's a basically a modular home that I live in, and there's about 3 of them on the premises and 2 hangars, and usually 1 helicopter. And so I've been here for a few years, and so what happens is rock will end up at the back door in the middle of the night, and Marcia makes him come to the back door. She says, "Don't come to the front door. Someone will see." So but he'll come in and hang out. We chat. We pass the information back and forth. He plays chess and he likes to watch football and eat Doritos. I don't know why, but that's his favorite food. I always keep some in the house.
Doritos.
I don't know why.
Interesting. With French, if it's with French onion dip, then I might think that I might be a little gray too.
I have 2 cats, and he likes to pet the cats. I don't know. I don't get that one either. But,
I think that cats are an alien species. I've walked into the room before. I had 3 at one point in my life, and I'd walk into the room and I swear that they were having some kind of meeting and even beaming messages back up to the mothership. They would get this reaction on them like, uh-oh, the humans are here. Start acting like a cat again.
What I've always wanted to do is to fly a spacecraft to the Washington Mall and get out with a few aliens in tow. A reptilian and then a tall white and an Anunnaki, and just sit down and have a picnic right there and have the people watch us. But I think that most of the treaties with the extraterrestrials have a little clause in them that their presence on the planet needs not to be known to the general public. And the general public they just don't feel that they're ready to deal with extraterrestrial species. And they're afraid. I mean, we've got so many people that would see one and say, "Oh, get the shotgun," and that's not what we need to have happen. But when I was on the Nibiru, I saw, of course, tall whites, reptilians, grays, and it was a trading spaceport. People were trading goods. It was very interesting to me to see it.
Wow.
And because I'm 6'2", but the Anunnaki, 7.5 to 8.5 feet tall, some of them. I mean, I'm just looking up.
And so what do they look like? Are they a reptilian type of species? Do they look like humans?
And they had a lot to do with mankind's evolving. And they modified our DNA some 65 times. And I've been told that by the military. And this would confirm what a friend of mine, Robert Lazar, has said. But basically, Akhenaten, do you remember him? He was a pharaoh in Egypt.
Akhenaten, yes.
And his wife, Nefertari.
Yes.
He was tall, thin, and he looked like
Barack Obama.
And so I would say that there's a tremendous similarity there.
Wow. That's absolutely fascinating. On the other side, John, I want to ask you about 2018 and the nuclear holocaust that is awaiting mankind. So we'll fast forward to the future now with John Titor right here on Beyond the Veil.
My dear traveler, remember this. Whatever planar consciousness may be acting in, both we and the things belonging to the planar, for the time being, are only realities. However, if we mistake the shadows for realities, we find ourselves confusing the upward progress of the ego as an elevation of consciousness. Thus, beware of oneself when you step beyond the veil.
When it comes to time travel, it really is just a matter of time. We're speaking with John Titor. We're going to fast forward to the future now. Does the destruction of the entire human race, or the majority of it, or life as we know it, lay just a year and a few months away? Is that what our future really is in 2018? John, you talk about the nuclear holocaust of 2018. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Right now, as we sit in 2016, we are looking at adversarial situations with Russia and Iran, North Korea. I don't view North Korea as a global threat. I don't think they've got the missile capability to reach us, but I think they can certainly wreak havoc on the Korean Peninsula and Japan. But the problem is, when you start setting off nuclear warheads, you create something called a nuclear winter. And a global nuclear winter, the effect is that you can't grow crops.
Right.
And the radiation poisons the ground, and then animals eat vegetation on the ground, and they get radiation poisoning. So you lose the whole food chain. And this will cause famine and civil unrest and violence, and police forces will not be able to control it. It just rapidly escalates mankind's demise on this planet, and I believe that mankind has already done a lot to ruin the environment on this planet. But in 2018, there's a distinct possibility that the Iranians will use large passenger jet aircraft as military launch platforms for missiles.
What do you think would push them to that point, though? Because Iran hasn't been aggressive towards any other state in, I want to say, 200 years. They haven't invaded anybody. They're less of a threat than anybody else in the world at this point. Now, obviously, they're working on nuclear technology. They're a huge, the big thing right now is that they're trying to create nuclear weapons. But really, when you think about it, Israel, the United States, we've got 650 nuclear weapons. So I don't see Iran being a threat, or even having an action like that, taking an action like that, unless there was some kind of catalyst that pushed them towards that, almost as if they had no other choice in the matter. Any insight into what that could be?
Well, it's religious bigotry that drives them. They believe that non-believers should die by the sword. And their religious leaders say that all the time, and they believe us to be inferior to them. And this is what they've been taught in Wahhabis from the time male children can read and write. They start teaching them this, and so they're pretty much indoctrinated. But Iran has been an exporter of terrorism to the world, and they're aided and abetted now by the Russians.
I don't find that to be the case. Iran is more of a first world country than anything else. Even Iraq, Saddam Hussein went after terrorists when he bombed the village and mustard gassed the village. He was very, very much against Al Qaeda, for instance. Libya, who was the guy, Muammar Gaddafi, he was the first one to want to hand over Osama bin Laden to the West. He didn't want to go along with the war on terror, but he wanted to hand over Osama bin Laden, and we said we don't want him. So I don't see that Iran has really done anything that the mainstream media has painted them out to. Who I see is the aggressor in this situation is Israel. Israel has been oppressing the Palestinian people. They have their doctrine says that they're God's chosen people and that they have a right to rule that entire region. And there's actually a plan. I want to say it's the new plan, the new Israel plan, or something like that, that says to take over Iraq, Iran, et cetera, and turn that into Greater Israel. That's it, the Greater Israel plan. So I don't see it, but maybe I'm just not quite seeing it. Can you elaborate a little more as to how that works?
Well,
Can I jump in for a second?
Yes, please do.
go ahead, Jason.
I've just been seeing this whole destabilization of the entire planet, and it's through the movement of globalization and central banking systems. And it almost seems like there is a push purposefully to pit one side against another, so that, you know, you get the populations fighting tribal warfare and bigotry and religious fundamentalists, while, you know, the globalists literally take such a strong hold over the entire planet, and they don't really care what happens to us in the end. They have their plan.
I would agree with you on that. Mm-hmm. And there is definitely a destabilization of the region. And it's funny because, well, not funny as in haha, but odd, funny as in odd, that all this revolves around Sumar. It revolves around the exact same region that the Anunnaki first landed on. So I'm wondering if there's a connection there.
Just from my own personal experiences, I just think that it's almost like the same histories repeating themselves, the same stories, the same fighting between families and tribes, and, you know, we're pulling in alien species like the Anunnaki in here because, you know, if we have been altered by them or even created by them, they are an extremely warlike race. Wouldn't that rub off on us too?
That is very true. If you look in the Lost Book of Enki and several of the other writings, you realize that they actually created war amongst the tribes of the quote-unquote Lulus in order to keep them in conflict so they can better control them. They also introduced alcohol. They introduced the monetary system, several other systems for the sole purpose of divide and conquer. So I completely agree with you on that. And it seems like those same systems are still in place right now, and they're still, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I feel. And remember, John is getting this intelligence from his travels. And remember, John, he is reporting what he sees. So, you know, the mainstream media, if you turn on the TV or listen to the news, they're just like constantly programming us and preparing us for something coming down the line, especially with Iran. It's on the news all the time. So why are we being pushed in this direction to say, okay, we hate these people, even though we don't know them, we hate these people, we hate these ideologies. So now we have a conflict brewing, because remember, the people at the top that have the money and the financing, they could definitely pull off these attacks that John is talking about and pit nations against each other.
That is very true. I would go so far as to say that 9/11 was one of these attacks that was orchestrated in order to do that, to create a pretext for going into Iraq, Afghanistan, taking over the region, destabilizing the region. We may see the same agenda played out over and over and over again, especially with the nuclear holocaust situation in 2018. Don't go anywhere. try not to get too much into politics on the broadcast, but one thing that we have talked about before is Israel's Samson option, which basically says if anybody gets in their way of the Greater Israel Plan, they will detonate nuclear weapons, and it will be mutual destruction, assured destruction, global destruction. And so it's speculated a lot of people don't get in the way, and that's why they've been able to embed themselves within so many different governments, including the United States. Most of our politicians have dual citizenship with Israel because of that Samson option, where they have nukes trained on all of the regions around the world. But again, that's all speculation. Now, it would make more sense to me if there was a nuclear holocaust in 2018, that it would be a false flag that was blamed on Iran rather than an action by Iran. But we got on the topic of 9/11 with John Titor and Jason Quitt. And John, I want to ask you, would it be possible to go back and perhaps change the events of 9/11 to make them never happen? And I speculate that in that timeline, things may not be as volatile as they are now. We may not face nuclear holocaust. We may not face the destruction, and we may actually move to a positive timeline. And if I can go so far as to make a prediction, I think that Trump is going to get the presidency, and he may lead us into a nuclear holocaust situation. Maybe you can chime in on both of those ideas.
I proposed to my commander, the person that I reported to, I proposed that we go back and thwart the 9/11 terrorists, and we knew where they were, and we could easily go back and just arrest them and deport them. And I was told no. And I was kind of disappointed with that, because there was a substantial loss of life there. Some 3,000 innocent lives were taken. And I just said, oh, okay. And then I was sending people out on other missions, and I just felt like maybe there was something they knew that I didn't. And so that was the end of it.
Well, we definitely have a butterfly effect when it comes to time travel, and that's something I assume has to be carefully calculated, because if you affect something in the future or the past, you affect the entire timeline up and down the line. So that makes me think of the Mandela Effect. I don't know if you're familiar with this phenomenon, but it's where certain little details are changed. For instance, in the movie Snow White, she no longer says mirror, mirror on the wall, but rather says magic mirror on the wall. Everybody remembers mirror, mirror. One of the most recent phenomenon is C-3PO. He has a silver leg now in the original New Hope film, which he never did before. And as a matter of fact, Cherie and I watched the entire trilogy, or all 6 of them, as a matter of fact, plus the 7th movie when the 7th one came out. We didn't notice C-3PO having a silver leg, and then one day, boom, it just appeared. He has a silver leg now in all of the shots, including the toys, and it seems like we're finding less and less pictures of him with the 2 gold legs and more with the silver. It's a very, very strange phenomenon. Some people are swearing that he's always had a silver leg. Others have never seen it before. So this is obviously the Mandela Effect. I'm sure you're familiar with that phenomenon. Would you say this is the result of bad memory on people's behalf, or is this the remnants of time manipulation?
The Mandela Effect is the merging of parallel time it can happen, and it's very subtle, and we don't even notice it. Yes. The 177, most of what the missions that we did was observe and report, and we were not to leave technology greater than what was there behind. We were not there to teach or inform. We just there to observe and report and then leave. And then at some point, that premise went away, and we became more aggressive, and we said, if we can improve the timeline so that it improves the survivability of our species and the planet, do it. And that was just evolved over time. And so would we try to take someone out that was going to be a potential Hitler and something like that? Those kinds of missions would be green lighted.
I see. Let's fast forward to the year 2030 and Dr. Michio Kaku. Can you tell us a little bit about that part of the book?
Dr. Kaku is absolutely, I feel, one of our most brilliant scientists. He has worked for the government. He's basically, that's where his paycheck comes from government funding. And what happened was, I'd read this white paper that he wrote, and this is kind of like the Mandela Effect even. I read the white paper on a stationary time machine that used quantum physics. The power requirements were just astronomical, but we had the power there at Area 51, and after I was done reading through the white paper, then I was actually given an overview of a stationary time machine there that they were using. And it was long past through the test period, and they were actually sending people on missions using it. And could it hit another geographic spot on the planet? Yes. So that the person could be transported there, or a team could be transported there. And so it was part teleportation and part time machine. But this thing was absolutely designed by him, and I saw it working. And then since my retirement, I've looked for that same white paper on the internet. It's not there. The internet's been scrubbed clean. There has been things even that I have written, and I've gone back to the internet and seen that they were scrubbed clean. That led me to create a page on Facebook where everything that I write of technical value, I actually put a copy there and keep a copy on a thumb drive and a hard drive, because I've seen some of my documents go missing. One document in particular was a program to appropriate scientists and people in biomedical pursuits and recruit them for off-world colonies.
I have noticed this phenomenon as well, John, where things just seem to disappear, even on my own machine, almost as if these documents never existed. It could be a wiping of the internet, or maybe as we pass into these parallel timelines, the documents just cease to exist, which is, of course, the Mandela Effect. Don't go anywhere, ladies and gentlemen. We've got much more with John Titor coming up. I want to talk about the nature of reality.
Welcome back, traveler. Take a deep breath and relax. As we continue to journey deeper beyond the veil.
There's so much more I want to get into. Operation High Jump, the Nazi Bell, much, much more. John, I'm not really sure where to go at this point, because I also want to talk about the nature of reality and the matrix that we live in, because I had an ayahuasca experience that I wrote about 3 years ago. You can still find the article on Before It's News. I think Mike Philbin reposted it there for us. It used to be on our website. It's no longer on our website, but thank God he reported it, or reposted it, I should say. And it really echoes a lot of the things that you say in your book when it comes to the nature of reality and what the Matrix is all about. So where do you think the best place to go is? The Nazi Bell, the Roswell and high jump connection, or should we jump right to the nature of reality?
Well, there's a lot of thoughts on the nature of reality.
Okay, well, let's start. Well, let me ask you guys this. Can we do an extra hour with you guys?
Sure.
Okay, fantastic. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will keep it going for an extra hour. So we'll get into the nature of reality during the next hour. In this hour, let's get into the Nazi Bell. Can you take us away, John?
Sure. A friend of mine, Kip Thorne, he's a professor at Caltech in Pasadena, California. And he espoused the theory that we're all just in a computer game and that the player has stepped away for a few minutes. And the first time I heard it from him, I kind of laughed. And then I thought about it. And it could be a very advanced computer game. And we're just all bouncing around in it. I actually don't think so. But that was what his thought was. And what I believe is that our reality is what we can see and smell and touch and taste. We have to rely on our senses. And our senses usually don't lie to us. But can there be as many as 14 parallel universes? I believe that we do live in a multi-dimensional reality.
That is something to ponder, and I want to hold that thought until the next hour because I want to dedicate an entire hour to that topic because it's one that we can really get in depth on. But can you tell us a little bit about the Nazi Bell technology?
The Nazi Bell technology was a special project, and Hans Kammler, a SS Nazi colonel, was placed in charge of this project along with all the other special weapons projects near the end of the war. And he had a plan. And the plan was that he could see that the war was going badly for Germany, and Germany was being overwhelmed logistically. We beat them logistically. Some of their weapons were very advanced and superior to what the Allies had. When you think about the Honeybu or Foo Fighters or the submachine gun that they had was a forerunner to the AK-47, and not least of which was their Panzer tank with a bigger cannon on than anything we had. They were the first ones to actually have jet fighters, and they used missiles, V1, V2 rockets against the United Kingdom very successfully. So they were very advanced, but they had help from extraterrestrials. And this one project, the Nazi Bell, what was interesting about it was that it was projected to be a time machine, and it ran on red mercury. But there was writing around the bottom of the bell, and no one really knew what the language was. There is some people that feel that it was going to be a projectile to be sent to Aldebaran, and that's not been discounted. That's still, I think, a good theory. But at the close of the war, U.S. Army got possession of the bell, and they brought it back to the United States. And then we have an occurrence in Pennsylvania where a very similar object lands, and it hits our atmosphere like a meteor and hits Pennsylvania, a rural part of Pennsylvania, and then is taken away to Wright-Patterson. So I believe that U.S. Air Force was looking at this technology and testing the technology and to determine what the capabilities were. Some suspected that the projectile was sent to Aldebaran or another world. I can neither confirm nor deny that. I just don't know. And that many of the secret projects are so compartmentalized. If you're not a member of the project, you're not going to know. Sometimes when you're at Area 51 and you're walking out on the runway, there are some things that you're going to see, obviously. In the early days at Area 51, it would be a common thing to see an SR-71 or a U-2. These were secret aircraft. And then even later, the SR-91, the Aurora, you would see that. But things were kept under wraps there and compartmentalized. And it would be a situation where sometimes extraterrestrials would actually come in a squadron formation and land at Area 51, and people that were not deemed of high enough clearance to see it were sent to an auditorium or to the cafeteria, and they did a head count there. And there were no openings in those for them to look out and see what was going on. That's how compartmentalized it gets.
Well, I'm looking at some of the photos in your book, and there's one that shows what looks like, or what could possibly be a launching pad for the Nazi bell, and it looks a lot like some kind of Stonehenge. I'm wondering if maybe Stonehenge could be related to extraterrestrials. I don't know if you get into any of that, but what about these ancient sites? Is there any connection?
That particular site, what I was told, and my opinion has not changed, that the bell, the Nazi bell, had anti-gravity capabilities, and so they chained it in that circular construct that they had and held it there. And I believe that they had an intention of letting it launch itself.
Wow. It's all starting to come together, ladies and gentlemen. We've got John Titor and Jason Quitt. Jason, on the other side, I want to get your take as well. And then in the extended hour, we'll talk about the nature of reality. Final segment of the hour, but we are going to do an extended hour with John Titor and Jason Quitt. Guys, before we go any further, tell people where they can pick up the books, any websites, anything like that. I'll go to Jason for that. And Jason, please chime in with any thoughts, too.
Sure. You can get the book Disclosed, Chronicles of John Titor II at Amazon.com. You could also find my book Forbidden Knowledge, Revelations of a Multi-Dimensional Time Traveler there as well. And you could also go to thecrystalsun.com. You'll find a lot of information on there. And John is on Facebook And John, do you want to tell them where they could find you?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. I have 3 or 4 pages there. I've reached the maximum of 5,000 on my personal Facebook page, which is at john.titor.79025. But there is a website, 177th Time Travel Division, and there's another one called the 177th Time Travel Division Team. And people have signed up to be on my team, and they're researchers and observers in this timeline, and they make contributions to efforts of investigation.
Fantastic. And Jason, your thoughts on the topics that we've discussed up to this point?
Well, a lot of this history I knew about, but when speaking to John, he really connected a lot of these dots for me. So right now, I don't have any opinion to add for these topics, but I got some good stuff for the nature of reality coming up.
Ah, excellent, excellent. So we will get into that here in about 10 minutes, and I know you've got some great stuff because I think we're right in tune as far as that goes, from what I can tell from the first hour of the broadcast. Now, John, let's fast forward over to the Roswell and Operation High Jump. Obviously, Operation High Jump was... the name eludes me. Admiral Byrd's expedition down to Antarctica. And a lot of people mistaken Operation High Jump with his expedition to the North Pole, but rather he only went to the North Pole once, but went to Antarctica several times, and that's where everything seemed to be located around and centralized around. In his diaries, he alludes to finding some kind of other planet, or not planet, that's not the right word, some kind of other plane or other landmass with aliens or extraterrestrials. He engaged with a few Foo Fighters. There's a whole backstory behind that, but Antarctica seems to be a place that's shrouded in mystery. And as a matter of fact, some of that mystery is revealed in 2050. So maybe you can take us down the road of Antarctica.
Well, we did a survey of Antarctica in 2050, and the ice sheet had basically melted off Antarctica, and we found the remnants of a civilization there, and the civilization was definitely Anunnaki. I believe that the subspecies of the Anunnaki is the tall whites, and they were there, definitely. That they were not still there. By 2050, there was a substantial exodus of extraterrestrials away from this planet. This planet was not hospitable to all life forms.
So, I'm sorry. Can you put that in another way? Because I didn't quite catch the context. This planet was not hospitable to several life forms.
To just about the oceans were dying. The atmosphere was filled with carcinogens. The medical world was not able to cope.
Sorry about that.
People that were coming to hospitals and having illnesses related to what comes down to the environment being poisoned. We continue to poison the environment with fracking. The water tables are polluted, especially here in California and in Nevada. In Nevada, what happens is radiation seeps into the water table. We've tried to dump radioactive waste, and it seeps down to the water table. We've got lots of carcinogens in the air. Chemtrails was an effort to geoengineer the atmosphere, and that has not been successful. There's just so many things going on. But basically, when we went to 2050, we realized the oceans were dying. Many species of sea animals and seabirds were dying off. Quite recently, President Obama went to Midway Island in the Pacific, and there are seabirds littered on the beaches there, and they're full of plastic. And indeed, the fishes and the seals in the air, they're just filled with plastic they've eaten, and they eat it and die.
Wow.
There are big floating islands that are hundreds of acres in area, and it's all just a big plastic mass. And we have the same thing going on in the Atlantic. But what happened to the oceans? The krill died, and then everything that feeds on the krill died. And just
Right.
except the food chain.
Oh, go ahead.
So we have this catastrophic thing going on. But definitely, when we went to Antarctica and we did a survey, we found under the ice that the Anunnaki had lived there at some point when they were colonizing this planet. And I believe that they abandoned that site. Now, during World War II, and just prior to it, Germany decided to start a colony in Antarctica, and they called it New Schwabia. And they had submarines that were sent there, and they had Foo Fighters or Honeyboo aircraft that was sent there. And basically what happens is, in 1947, Admiral Byrd takes a task force there, and he loses ships, planes, and personnel, and withdraws. And basically, it was a hasty withdrawal.
I see. So, are there a lot of resources down there? Is there an entire landmass down there? Alien bases, things like that?
What I believe is there is remnants of the Nazis and tall whites.
Oh,
okay.
I see. That makes sense. I have a theory, and this is just a theory just based on just my own speculation. It's not factually based or anything like that. But I believe that the reason we're seeing this Mandela effect is because what they actually did is they went back in time and they saved Hitler. Rather than Hitler dying in a ditch, as he did in one timeline, they went back and transferred him down to Argentina, moved all of the Nazis down to Antarctica for one reason or another, and that was the cause for all of these shifts that we're experiencing. How does that sound to you? Again, it's just a theory based on pure speculation.
A retired CIA operative named Bob Baer investigated Hitler's death. And the Russians had bones that they thought were Hitler's, and they did DNA testing on the bones and found they were of a female German type DNA and not Hitler's. And Hitler, just as Churchill and FDR, had doubles.
Fascinating. Hold right there, guys. We will be right back. We have the extended hour with John Titor and Jason Quitt right here on Beyond the Veil. And everybody listening on the AM and FM affiliates, you can catch the extended hour at truthfrequencyradio.com. Everybody listening live this evening, you've got a treat coming up. We're going to talk about the nature of reality and much more. And we'll be right back.
Thank you for traveling with us this evening. Meditate on your experience. And remember, reality is merely an illusion. Thus, we wish you pleasant dreams. www.beyondtheveilradio.com.
This is the Truth Frequency Radio Network. We are TFR. Truth Frequency Radio.
time is but a loop, with a loose stitch in the universal cloth. A traveler may seize upon the chance to rip the seam and step beyond the veil.
Greetings once again, fellow travelers. Hour number 4 right here on Beyond the Veil. This is definitely where science fiction meets science fact, and we will be taking another journey through the realms of time and space. We'll be guided by the spirits of our ancestors, and we'll follow the clues etched in stone that are left behind, which echo through the ages. Special thanks to John Titor and Jason Quitt for staying with us for another hour. I can tell John is getting a little tired, but this information is just so stimulating and groundbreaking. I mean, it's really tying everything in together that I'm so glad that they agreed to do another hour, especially on the nature of reality, because this is a topic we've covered so many times before, and there's so many different takes. So Jason, let's go to you first and foremost about the nature of reality and what exactly is this construct that we live in.
Okay, well, first I'll kind of get into my experiences as, I would say, being a multidimensional being, which means going beyond the third dimension. So, and I'll just describe it as how I see it, very truthfully, through the experience, is that once I leave my body and I enter into what we would call the astral world or fourth dimension, these portals open up. And these portals, they're not very big. I would say they're about 3 to 4 feet in diameter, not very big, and they look like black holes. And you get pulled into these holes. And what happens is that when you're in this fourth dimensional state, there is no time and space as we know it. As in, when I enter these portals, I can be transported to other universes. I could be transported through time. I could also be transported to other civilizations in time or other planetary systems. When I started to learn how to do this, there was a being there that was assisting me, and they were talking about through these portal systems, I now have access to, they called it the 7 parallel universes. So from my perspective of through my travels, there is 7 distinct universes that can be traveled through this portal system. So that is kind of the design. And also, when I leave my body, it's not something that I consciously ask, I want to go here. It's almost like once I leave, I'm being actually pulled in a direction, and I can't force myself out of this. It's almost like I just get pulled out, and I can see this portal opening up, and then you shoot through the portal. And this portal, the only thing that I can tell you about traveling through portals is the sound. It really sounds like very loud white noise, and it's almost like wind blowing through your ears at a very fast pace, and you almost get a sense like you're traveling quite a far distance. Another thing which I would call the nature of reality, which really shocked me, was, and I'll just kind of set the scene here. Let's say I'm dreaming and I'm on a beach, and it's a beautiful scenery. You know, the water's coming in. I'm experiencing me on a beach. And then suddenly I wake up from this dream and I'm in bed. And I sit up in my bed, fully awake, and I realize I'm still on this beach. So now my bed is on the beach. And suddenly to the left of me, this portal, about a 3-foot portal, opens up about 6 feet away from me, and it slowly sucks that scene of the beach into the portal like a liquid, revealing my bedroom behind it. And it was the first time in my life where I'm just sitting in bed shocked, watching this process, going from the dream world to reality. And I'm thinking, did I just witness a glitch in the matrix? And by the way, none of these experiences were under the influence of any drugs or medication.
Wow. That's a pretty heavy experience. I've got to say that I had an experience that was very similar to what you and John talk about in the book during an ayahuasca experience. And I wrote about this back in December of 2013. It's posted on Before It's News. So I'll give you the quick rundown to this. But essentially, I was transported into this, what appears to be some kind of spaceship or craft. And there were these 3 tall gray aliens. And I saw this little ball of energy that was sitting on, it looked like a desk or something. It was hard to make out because they vibrated at a higher frequency and the whole realm was a higher frequency. So as I described in the first hour, my body and my third eye and my DNA wasn't upgraded to the point where I could see as clear as I wanted to. So a lot of things were light and silhouettes rather than actual beings. I'm sure they had more of a form than what I was able to see. But there was this ball of energy that was sitting there, and I asked them, what is it? And they said, it's the universe. And I said, oh, so did you create it? They said, no, we didn't actually create it, but rather we maintain it. And I said, well, why do you maintain it? And they say, we maintain it because that's where souls exist. And souls couldn't exist without this construct that we've created. And they were actually pretty condescending. They called me a talking monkey. They told me to go back to my monkey business. They said this, all the stuff that I was seeing was none of my concern. The questions that I was asking was none of my concern. But I kind of forced answers out of them during this experience. Now, John, you talk about a similar type of being that maintains this construct in the book, if I remember correctly. I may be thinking about a different work.
I think you are.
Okay.
I think that I've agreed not to discuss it too much, but Yahweh is the supreme being, as I've told you, and I've had some discussions, and he has technology, but he also has abilities, mental abilities, to change space, time, gravity at will, mentally. It's quite an ability. But could he wave a hand and create a galaxy? I think he could.
So what is the origin of this Yahweh character? Because there's been quite a bit of controversy here on the broadcast as to exactly who this character is. Obviously, going back to the Gnostic text, Yahweh is the demiurge, and it's a being that believes it's the supreme being, but rather is not the supreme being.
I believe it to be, by definition, a supreme being, and I think it's ageless. And age has no meaning for it. But I definitely believe that it has the intellect and the technology to go with it, to do whatever it wants, create matter. I thought, yes.
Manifestation. We'll talk more about that right on the other side. We have John Titor and Jason Quitt on for the bonus hour here on Beyond the Veil. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome, fellow traveler. Are you ready to journey beyond time and space? During this adventure, we may encounter otherworldly intelligences, but have no fear. We are protected by the spirits of our ancestors and guided by messages etched in stone that echo through the ages. Now sit back, take a deep breath, and prepare to step beyond the veil.
Now, John, I may have extrapolated a little bit on something that you said in the book with the previous experience. You write here about the Black Knight satellite. No government has ever attempted to dock or capture this satellite. I suspect they fear there would be dire consequences. Rock told me that unless there is a distress signal, no other extraterrestrial species will attempt to go to it. Doing so would be considered an act of aggression by other extraterrestrials in the galaxy. And then you go on to further say it's not the Greys or the Reptilians or the Tall Whites. I also don't believe the Anunnaki are involved in any way with it. We live in an engineered planet, in an engineered solar system, and quite possibly in an engineered galaxy. In my view, we are being observed by a superior intelligence species that has not been previously identified. At the same time, this intelligence must have a reverence for the life forms on this planet, but I believe this intelligent species also has the power to eliminate life on the planet. So I'm wondering, perhaps you're talking about Yahweh there, and maybe I got the information mixed up as well, because you also mentioned Elon Musk later on in the book, and obviously right now he's most famous for not only SpaceX and other technologies, but also the quote about living in an artificial simulation. So I know that's a big question to tackle there, but can you take us away along those lines?
Well, the Black Knight, I believe that it communicates to an entity in Epsilon Bootes. And I believe that that entity may very well be a similar being to Yahweh, or it may be a very technically advanced civilization. But we are definitely being monitored. The construct of the way the moon orbits this planet had a great deal to do with the way that life evolved on this planet. And indeed, life would not have evolved on this planet the way it has without tides. And tides are created by the moon. So there's a lot of engineering that went into the Earth, and I believe that it is more than possible to move planets around, and I believe that part of the engineering that had gone on was to move planets so that this relationship would in fact take place. Now, I did a survey of the moon. I did a survey of Mars. I found that Mars was a planet decimated by nuclear war. But on the moon, there are structures, and these structures are basically mining and a spaceport. They have a communications tower that has been documented several times, and the pictures float around. But I was not authorized to do a landing. I was not authorized to try to communicate with those facilities on the moon, but I definitely saw them and photographed them. I believe that all the astronauts that went to the moon saw these same things, and in some cases saw extraterrestrials. I know that Story Musgrave talked about one mission that he did on the space shuttle, and indeed he took instructions from an extraterrestrial on launching the package from the shuttle bay. So we've worked with extraterrestrials all along. I believe that what has been done to our national NASA's exploration of space is a very scaled down because we don't really need it. It's just for the public to watch. And it's going very slowly because we are already there and we know the answers. and this is just for show. This whole thing of Orion spacecraft is a small capsule that goes up to the ISS docks, and you can change crews with it. So we're just really maintaining the ISS in the public side, all the while we have spacecraft that can travel intergalactically.
I see. So I know there's a lot of strange occurrences on the moon. So is there any insight into whether the moon is an actual celestial object or, as some people speculate, a manufactured object?
I don't think it's manufactured. I believe that the moon was pushed into an orbit around the Earth, and it's not hollow, it's not constructed. I think it was some kind of dwarf planet that they've used.
Very interesting. I've read about some civilizations, and this is all secondhand stuff of articles that I've read claiming that certain civilizations said certain things. So I can't verify this as fact, but I've read that some civilizations have stated that there wasn't a moon during their time, and the moon appeared at one point in time. That changed the dynamic of everything. It changed the tides. It changed women's menstrual cycles, and then we started to become physically and mentally affected by the moon, where you get the term lunacy from. So people started obviously becoming mentally affected by the presence of this object. Is there any insight into whether this object existed always with planet Earth, or maybe it was injected at one point in time later on, or perhaps it was an actual structure that was maybe hollowed out by an extraterrestrial race, turned into some kind of observation platform or spaceship or something like that, and it's been sitting there watching us this whole time?
Well, I definitely believe it's a platform for watching us, but it's what they do is use the dark side of the moon, the side that we don't see, and they seem to like to use that as cover. But again, we're monitored and we're watched to some degree. I believe that we are a science experiment for some very advanced species. I think that the Anunnaki and the Greys have a lot to do with creating us in the very beginning, mankind.
Jason, any thoughts?
Well, just if you look at the geometry of the moon and the position from the Earth, the moon, and the sun, when you have an eclipse, it's basically exactly the same size as the sun. So you have all these mathematical anomalies when it comes to actual scale of planets according to distance and orbit, where you get this incredible geometric patterns that play out with the planets. And if you would calculate these geometries, it's quite obvious that it is done by some type of very intelligent design.
It's not an accident.
Oh, go ahead.
It's not an accident.
I would completely agree. It's funny, I was just on this topic with a friend yesterday on how the moon is just as far from Earth in its proportion in size of the moon as the sun is in between distance and proportion of the size of the sun, which makes them almost perfectly appear the same size in our sky, able to eclipse one another, et cetera, et cetera. And so there has to be absolutely some intelligent design to the placement of all of this. Fascinating stuff. We'll be right back. We've got John Titor and Jason Quitt on for the remainder of the hour right here on Beyond the Veil. I have so many more thoughts on the nature of reality, the computer simulation. You know, I've heard the government actually has a plan to create avatars of each and every one of us. They've uploaded them into a computer, and they're able to predict what we're going to do based on all of the data that's inside of this computer system. Some say it's even active right now. And the thought has crossed my mind that perhaps we're actually the ones that are in the computer simulation, and that's the reason why we're in a computer simulation. And what we're experiencing right now is based on the programming that was injected into this machine, and our actual selves are outside living in some reality, and we are actually the digital simulations ourselves. So something to ponder. It really is a wheel within a wheel within a wheel. But I want to veer away from the topic of the nature of reality for a little bit, and I want to go back to the war with the Anunnaki and the Greys, because there was one thing that I wanted to ask John, and I didn't get a chance to. So, John, let me ask you this. Nibiru, is that on our radar right now? We talk about UB313. Is that really Nibiru, or is that just a smokescreen for Nibiru?
That's the smokescreen for Nibiru. That's the government smokescreen, UB313. And that's one of the first things I learned when I was at Area 51. That was, like I'm saying, I go to Nibiru, UB313. And they say, no, that's not where you're going.
So where is Nibiru?
It's in the solar system. And it's on an elliptical orbit. And it's at the very edge of the solar system.
Wow.
And it's always been there, but we're just starting to get to the point where people realize that it's there. Nibiru is interesting because they have a way of creating an atmosphere that reflects all light within the atmosphere. So they don't have a sun per se, but what they have engineered using gold and some other compounds that they spread in their atmosphere. They do have one. It reflects light, so they go out, and when you go outside the buildings, you put your sunglasses on because of the glare. It's not an intense heat or anything. You have a glare. And you have to deal with that. But even the coatings on their buildings help reflect the light. And just as when you're out on the ocean and you don't put sunscreen on, and what happens is the UV rays bouncing off the ocean from the sun, you get tanned, right? Same principle here. What they did was realize that they could get light to refract on itself hundreds of times. So they create light in their atmosphere, and it works for them.
We seem to be doing the same thing here with the chemtrail program. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when Zecharia Sitchin was decoding these, especially, I want to say around the 70s, it was hard to imagine this type of technology. Oh, they get gold and they spray it in their atmosphere. How does that work? Well, now you look at the sky and you see geoengineering programs. We're using barium and aluminum, but I imagine it's the same type of technology that's being deployed right here on planet Earth.
And I think that they got it from the Anunnaki, because part of our agreement, our diplomatic agreement, was that they would assist us with geoengineering and some other issues that we had. Global warming was one. But the problem with global warming on this planet is that we've gone beyond the point of no return. And just as you see in An Inconvenient Truth, the movie that Al Gore produced, the Earth is warming up, and we can't stop it. So,
wow. I seem to remember you talking about the Bush and Gore situation back in 2000, where it seemed to be like a military coup. when Bush took over, because Al Gore did get the presidency, but then he was kicked out at that point, and Bush was injected. Is that your book that you go into that the possible timeline?
I didn't go into that in the book, but what happens is that the results of the election were actually argued before the Supreme Court of the United States, and the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in favor of George W. Bush, and he became president.
Well, it would seem as if Al Gore, if he had gotten the nomination, and I mean, if he had gotten the presidency back then, things would have been a lot different as far as climate change, not climate change, but the idea that all of the technology that we're using right now is filthy and it's ruining the planet. And I think a lot of things might have changed if it had been Al Gore, but instead it was George W. Bush, who didn't care at all about the environment or the planetary resources that we have.
That was the timeline branching off, and not for the better for mankind.
Wow. So do you think that we have reached a point of no return and that the Earth is essentially going to cease to have life?
Yes.
Wow.
Well, what's the contingency plan? Because there has to be a contingency plan.
A plan B.
I know the TR3Bs are involved in this. So tell us a little bit about that, please.
Is to identify and colonize other worlds like the Earth and not pollute them again. But there are 2 off-world colonies. I've actually been invited to become an administrator at one, and I have not been able to convince my wife Marcia yet to go. But when it gets intolerable, I will go to where I'm hiding my personal spacecraft, get in it with Marcia, and go by and collect Jason and his wife, and off we go.
Well, we've talked about the breakaway civilizations with Andy Bashago, William Whitecrow, and many others. They frame it in the context of Project Mars and Project Pegasus. They say that they're colonizing Mars for this particular purpose, but there are definitely breakaway civilizations. We've also talked about the underground bunkers that they've been building over the course of the last decade or 2 decades. But I think these are many different layers. So you have contingency plans to move some people to underground bunkers, some people off-world, some people out of the galaxy as well. We're heading for disaster. Is there any way to avert this disaster?
Not now. Not now. It's the amount of effort that needs to take place to clean up the environment is not undoable, but the world would have to abandon forests for a few decades.
Wow, think about that, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get more from John Titor right here on Beyond the Veil.
Everything that is, was, and will be, eternally is. Even the countless forms which are finite and perishable only in their objective, and not in their ideal form, the form which manifests itself. Beyond the Veil.
2 more segments with John Titor and Jason Quitt right here on the extended hour of Beyond the Veil. I want to talk about something that's a little disheartening, that's a better word. The end of humanity, which we seem to be spiraling towards right now. The Zika virus, obviously, is something that is of concern. Is it a manufactured pandemic, or can it lead to more? A few years ago, a documentary came out called 2100, and it talked about the end of the world in the year 2100. Now, John, in the book, you also point to this 2100 date. Can you take us through the unfortunate destruction of the human species, at least the ones on planet Earth?
I believe that we've been under attack, and it's a eugenics war. They were using Ebola on us for a while, but I think that eugenics goes back quite a ways. I think that overall there have been some pandemics, like the Spanish flu and other things that come our way, but the Zika virus is an engineered virus, and it's the perfect virus. First, it's better than yellow fever or any of the other things that were transmitted by mosquitoes. But first, you get infected by the mosquito that has Zika, and then you transmit it, and it becomes an STD. Mm-hmm. And it's going to just go like wildfire, and the medical establishment will be stretched to the very limits over it. It just will overwhelm the human race.
Wow.
And it's been engineered as a weapon against us by a group of extraterrestrials.
Which group of extraterrestrials developed something as horrific as an STD that can actually be transmitted by mosquitoes first?
It's a good question.
I know who is the likely suspect, but I'm not going to say it over the air because it's going to create all kinds of issues in the realm of extraterrestrial politics, shall we say. But I have consulted on this, and I frequently go to Edwards Air Force Base, or they actually come out and visit me at the compound, and we've had endless discussions on this. And what I looked at was the spacecraft that was seen in the areas of South America where Zika started up, and it wasn't just Zika anymore, it was also a follow-on STD. And
well, an STD is a perfect deployment because then it attacks the reproductive system. If you're trying to take out a species, then you make them reluctant to reproduce because of that STD, and those that try to reproduce spread it even more and more and more, then it eventually eats the whole species.
Exactly. But if you look at mankind's history, we've had these other pandemics, syphilis, gonorrhea, tuberculosis, all these different pandemics. The Black Plague, now that was the pandemic, in the Renaissance?
1348.
It was, and the image of the Grim Reaper actually came from reports that said that there were these figures that would appear with what looked like scythes, and they would appear within the fields spraying some kind of green gas wherever the plague would lead to. And people nowadays speculate that those possibly could have been some type of extraterrestrials that were actually transmitting this particular virus through some kind of chemical weapon.
It's not impossible. I look at absolutely as a eugenics war, and the Congress of the United States has been absolutely criminal in not stepping up to this fight. And what I find with Congress is they won't work on environmental issues, they won't work on pollution issues with the oceans and the air. They're paid by lobbyists to vote a certain way for big business, and that's all they care about.
Well, they seem to be doing the exact opposite. They seem to be running to grab as many resources as possible, as quickly as possible, with no regard for the environment, no regard for planet Earth, which makes me further believe that they do have some kind of agenda to take as many resources as possible and leave the planet.
It's not out of the realm of possibility. You may be very correct in that viewpoint, but I believe that, look at this answer here. If you eliminate the human race from the equation, could the environment heal itself on its own over thousands of years? I suspect yes.
What about the animals? The animal life in 2100 or 2050. What do you see
Expired.
happening to them?
Expired.
Oh,
Fish in the oceans, the whales, the dolphins, the seals, gone. The wildlife in the forests. What is going to happen with your forests? And we see this now just a little bit. California, Nevada, and some parts of the United States. We have intense heat, over 120 degrees, and then we get fires and high winds, and we can't stop the fires. And they just literally burn thousands of acres. California had some fires here within the last 90 days, and effectively the firefighters were trying to fight them in 120 degree heat and couldn't. They let them burn themselves out.
you know, we had a fire that was that bad last year up in this area, and it was only 6 or 7 miles away from our house when it was at its peak, and all it was just smoke, and everything smelled like smoke. You couldn't even go outside for very long without coughing because it was so strong. And I thought about all those poor animals that are trying to build their nests for the winter, and they're not going to be able to, and they might very well die.
It's devastating to the animal life, certainly, but it's devastating to our lungs. In proximity, you can't stay in proximity. In California and Nevada, they told people to evacuate areas just because of the atmospheric conditions.
Right.
Wow.
Man.
Well, the hope here is, though, that through spirituality and through the consciousness shift, when we leave this planet Earth, perhaps we can evolve into a higher realm of dimension and higher realm of existence. To my understanding, John, the Greys have a very good sense of spirituality in the sense that they remember their past lives, that rather than being wiped like we are during each incarnation, they're able to evolve. And they don't see death as the same way that we do, but rather they just see it as a transformation, like getting a new car or something like that. Do you find that to be the case with them?
The Greys are a hive species. And it's more like the tall Greys are like the queen bees. And I've never seen them with females. I don't know anything about their reproductive. I never got that from Rock. And I have to tell you that I have to be very careful what questions I ask him. Sometimes I ask him things and he'll respond. Right?
Wow. Hold right there. Final segment coming up with John Titor and Jason Quitt right here on Beyond the Veil. I had a dream. I really did have a dream the other day. It was very strange. It was in the middle of the day. I woke up. I fell asleep. And I dreamt that I was in Antarctica. And I was at the edge of the known world. And I was looking out at the sky. And you could see the Milky Way just completely beautiful. And I was holding this little girl who I think was my daughter. And I don't have any kids, but obviously she was a daughter or something in the dream. And I was holding her. She was probably 1 year old, 2 years old, small baby. And we get on this spacecraft and we go over this ocean and we get to another landmass that lays on the other side. And we see these Greys, and they're just it's like a civilization, just like ours. I remember we were passing by this playground, and there were little gray babies playing in the playground, and my daughter that I was holding was waving at them, and the little gray babies were waving back. And this was a few weeks ago before I had a chance to read the book. And I don't get a chance to read very many of the books of the guests in as much detail as I read this one, but this one just captivated me so much that I really just dug right into it. And John, in the book you talk about Wolf 1061c, the New Earth, which, as far as I understand, you have grays and humans living together, working together, playing together. And the dream that I had a few weeks prior to actually reading this book is very similar to what I imagine this other new world actually is. So after I read the book, I was wondering if maybe the dream I had was a glimpse into this Wolf 1061c New Earth that you talk about.
On the off-world colonies started by the United States, I would suspect that they would allow gray aliens and reptilians and other species to land and to trade. Certainly, I don't see that as an issue. That was part of the desire, basically. Wolf 1061c is 11 times the size of Earth. So there's plenty of it to go around. Certainly, it could be split between other countries, should they desire. I think that they would be welcomed on. There's in the Wolf system and in the Kepler system, there is 2 off-world colonies. And the real thing about an off-world colony, now you have to picture this, you have to get to the point where you can use the resources of the planet and not depend on freighters from Earth or other places to survive. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
That's the true test. That's the litmus test of whether that off-world colony takes root and survives. They have to do their own mining of resources and so forth and grow their own food and harvest their food. You see what I'm saying?
I do. So at least there's hope for mankind and for civilization. Jason, you've been holding there very patiently. I was going to open up the phone lines in the last couple of segments, but I don't think we have time to do that. So anything you'd like to chime in on or anything you'd like to go into before we run out of time?
I'll just add something else, which is this may not be the first time we've had to leave our planet.
Ooh. I think you're onto something with that because it feels to me, and again, this is another hypothesis that I have based on pure speculation, but this planet doesn't actually belong to us. I believe that it originally belonged to the reptilians.
You're onto something too.
Ooh. Hey,
That may be.
Oh, go ahead.
That may be.
I think so, and I think that they want their planet back because we've destroyed it. And I'm wondering if maybe it's the reptilians that are unleashing all this upon the quote-unquote Lulus. And then it makes me wonder, too, where the Anunnaki play into all of this. Because in my analysis, this Yahweh character is most likely Enlil, but maybe not. But this is just what I pick up from reading the Anunnaki tablets. But they did invade this planet. I mean, there is no doubt about that. They invaded the planet. They manipulated the hominoids that were here. There seemed to be a split between Enlil and Enki. Enki and Hersak had more of an affection for the Lulus that they created, whereas Enlil was very wrathful and vengeful and everything that you read about in the Bible, which makes me compare him to the Yahweh character. But maybe not all the Anunnaki are the same. Maybe some do see us differently and some see us as expendable. And I always wondered where the Greys came in, but maybe the Greys are indeed on our side, as you claim.
I think they are. I do.
We will have to see. I would love to meet one. I feel like I have met them in the past, but again, every time I meet them, I'm in that state of not being able to think properly, or it's a disassociated state. And I feel that it may be somewhat of a violation of a sovereign being, because I consider myself a sovereign being. I am a sovereign being. I'm not even considering it a sovereign soul. And to hijack somebody's consciousness in that manner, whether it's to keep themselves safe or not, I think it would be much more productive if we sat down on a radio show and had an interview instead of
let us reason together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's philosophize about the world. Don't put me in these states and where I can't ask the questions that I want to ask, like who are you, where did you come from, et cetera, et cetera.
Don't jump to conclusions so quickly, because we forget that physical contact with an extraterrestrial, let's say like a ship or an entity coming towards you, but what if you're communicating with beings on another planet, in another system altogether? They can actually travel multidimensionally and set up realities through your consciousness. So you can actually have direct sit-down meetings with different beings from other planets, and it's all being orchestrated in your consciousness. And that is the safest way of communication and contact.
I'm going to have to try that in my shamanic journeys next time.
I have one last question for John. All of these dead scientists, in the 1980s, we had the Marconi scientists that just ended up dead in weird accidents and things like that. And then up until today, when we just had Ebola researchers and people investigating things like the Zika virus just die in mysterious accidents and weird events.
That's exactly what happens. They ask these people if they'd like to go to the off-world colony, and basically they kill them off in their present reality, and they get a plane ride to Area 51 courtesy of Janus, and off they go. And I believe that they've done a lot of recruiting from academia and from the sciences, and the military, it's a little different situation. They hand you orders and they say, like, if you wish to take your family, you can.
I agree with you, John, and I think that's what account for a lot of the celebrity deaths, mysterious, that we've seen lately. They've bought their ticket off planet. We can go on for another 3 hours, but we're going to have to save it for another broadcast. Guys, I want to thank you very much for the time this evening, especially the extra hour. That was very gracious of you. Please give us the websites one more time where people can pick up the books.
Sure. You can find them both on Amazon.com. And the name of the book is Disclosed, Chronicles of John Titor II, and also Forbidden Knowledge, Revelations of a Multi-Dimensional Time Traveler. You could also visit my website, which is thecrystalsun.com. And you can connect with John on Facebook at the 177 Time Travel Division. Do you want to add anything, John?
Chris, I think you have my phone number too, don't you?
Yes.
Call me anytime.
Thank you. We will do that for sure, because we definitely want to have you on again. And ladies and gentlemen, I don't say this too much, but you've got to pick up this book. And when I say it, I mean it, because it hooks you in. You go through all of these different situations, and it all ties it all together. So thank you very much for sticking with us this evening. Stay tuned. We've got much more coming up right here on Truth Frequency Radio, your protection from deception.
Love
we'll
you
see
guys.
you tomorrow night.
We'll see you tomorrow night.
Much more.
Yeah.
Phase 1 has been completed. Phase 2 will be initiated momentarily. Please remain seated while we prepare to go deeper. You can visit us at www.beyondtheveilradio.com.
You are now tuned into the truth frequency.
Your protection from deception. TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio.